You think the voice in your head is you, until the moment you try to control your next thought and nothing obeys. What if the speaker inside you isn't the one who's aware of it? What if the I you defend is only an echo wearing your face? There's a crack in the mind where the truth slips through, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Lean in, watch till the end, because the real you has never spoken a single word. A strange tension fills the room when the inner voice fires its next line without warning. It judges, predicts, interrupts, and rearranges itself before you even know what it plans to say. The commentary feels familiar, yet it behaves like weather forming out of nowhere. One moment it whispers doubt, the next it manufactures certainty. And the silence between its movements asks a question no one wants to face. Then comes the unsettling realization that the voice speaks first and the listener appears after. Reactions bloom before intention has time to exist. Thoughts jump ahead like shadows moving faster than the body that casts them. The commentary keeps claiming ownership, my thought, my opinion, even though it never asked permission before arriving. This mismatch creates a crack in the illusion of control you thought you had. A deeper discomfort rises when you notice a gap between what's said and the one who notices it. The voice throws statements like stones into still water, yet the awareness receiving them doesn't ripple the same way. The mind declares certainty while something quiet watches the declaration come and go. That calm watcher doesn't speak, argue, or explain. It simply sees, untouched by the noise it observes. For a moment, you might try to catch the next thought before it forms. But nothing happens. The mind refuses to reveal its script ahead of time. You wait in the space before thinking, only to witness a sentence erupt from nowhere, fully formed. This unpredictability exposes an uncomfortable truth: the voice acts on its own, while awareness simply receives whatever appears. And as this dynamic becomes clearer, a final tension takes hold, a question that doesn't go away. If the inner voice creates itself without your consent, and the awareness behind it never speaks, then who exactly is the I you've been identifying with all this time? The mind loves telling a story about who you are, shaping a character out of memories, opinions, and borrowed language. It repeats the same lines until they feel like truth. I'm this kind of person, I always react this way, I could never change. That internal storyteller grows louder with every experience you label as mine. Yet beneath its confidence hides something fragile, the fact that this identity didn't originate in you. It was stitched together long before you ever questioned it. From early childhood, the voice absorbs the roles handed to it: the good one, the difficult one, the achiever, the disappointment. Each title becomes a costume the mind insists on wearing, even when it no longer fits. Over time, the character and the commentary fuse into one seamless performance. What started as a protective script becomes a cage built out of familiar lines. Still, the story feels safer than the silence that threatens to rewrite everything. This fictional I becomes the lens through which every moment is interpreted. Success is filtered through pride, failure is filtered through shame, connection is filtered through the fear of being exposed. The character reacts automatically, yet claims authorship of decisions it never consciously made. If you look closely, the ego behaves more like an actor following an old script than a being responding freely. And that recognition cracks open a doorway to something truer. Consider how quickly the inner voice defends its story when challenged. A simple comment, a sideways glance, or an unexpected outcome can trigger a flood of inner dialogue. The character panics whenever the narrative feels threatened, because without its script, it doesn't know who to be. This defensive reflex reveals a secret: the story depends on your belief to survive. Without your attention, it collapses like a stage set in the dark. So here's the invitation: subscribe if you're ready to see through the character the mind invented and step into something quieter. And let this question linger in the background: if the ego story isn't you, then who's been watching it unfold all these years? There's a quiet shift when attention stops chasing the voice and starts noticing the space around it. Thoughts still arrive, but the center of gravity changes. The focus falls not on the words, but on the awareness receiving them. It feels like stepping out of a crowded room into open air. The noise continues behind you, yet something within stands untouched. This untouched presence hints at a witness hidden in plain sight. As this witness becomes clearer, the mind tries to label it, analyze it, or turn it into another concept. But every attempt fails. Labels break on contact because the witness can't be held the way thoughts can. You can observe emotion tightening the chest, but the noticing doesn't tighten. You can watch thoughts loop, but the awareness behind them doesn't loop. It stays still, unbothered, undescribed. In that stillness, a subtle recognition emerges. The witness sees both the inner commentary and the one who feels pulled by it. It watches the ego defend itself. It watches the impulse to fix, hide, or prove something. It watches without needing to interfere. The more this stillness is noticed, the more obvious it becomes that awareness has never been part of the drama. It was simply mistaken for a character playing inside it. And there's an unexpected relief in realizing that awareness doesn't argue, doesn't panic, doesn't cling. It doesn't ask for certainty. It doesn't need a story to feel real. It's like stepping behind the mirror and finding the one place where reflections can't reach you. This recognition doesn't solve everything, but it changes the angle from which everything is seen. And that's where true freedom begins to surface. If this resonates, like the video to anchor this shift. Because the real question now gathering strength is this: if the witness has always been here, why did the mind spend so long pretending it wasn't? Something profound shifts when you stop assuming that consciousness lives inside the brain like a tenant in a rented room. Instead of treating awareness as a product, the possibility emerges that awareness is the field in which everything arises: thought, sensation, memory, even the sense of being someone. The brain begins to feel less like a generator and more like a filter, shaping how consciousness is expressed. And that flips the entire framework of identity upside down. Imagine this for a moment: thinking can stop, memory can blur, mood can change, yet awareness doesn't dim. It doesn't flicker the way thoughts do. It stays open, steady, luminous in its own quiet way. When awe or beauty hits, thinking pauses but presence intensifies. This alone challenges the common assumption that awareness depends on the mind's activity. Instead, it seems the mind depends on awareness to appear at all. Awareness behaves more like the sky than the clouds moving through it. Thoughts flash, dissolve, return, collide, but the open space holding them doesn't age or react. It doesn't get tangled in the storylines it illuminates. When consciousness is seen as primary, the sense of being a separate thinker begins to loosen. Life is no longer viewed as something happening inside a person, but as something appearing within an unbounded field that can't be grasped. Here's a simple practice to taste this directly: no beliefs needed. Close your eyes for a moment and notice the next thought forming. Don't chase it, just notice the space it emerges from. Then notice how that space remains exactly the same after the thought dissolves. This gap between thoughts is the doorway. No narrative. No character. Just wide, impersonal presence holding everything without effort. And if consciousness is the ground of being rather than a mental byproduct, then the real question begins to sharpen. What exactly is the mind, if not the source of awareness it claims to be? The inner voice often feels personal, but the moment you examine its structure, something strange happens. It begins to sound familiar in ways that have nothing to do with you. The tone, the rhythm, even the vocabulary carry traces of early authority figures. Echoes of parents, teachers, cultural norms, and childhood corrections bleed into the commentary you call my thought. That alone destabilizes the idea of ownership. Listen closely and you might notice how quickly the voice shifts masks depending on the situation. Under pressure, it becomes the stern critic; in uncertainty, it becomes the anxious planner; in moments of vulnerability, it repeats old warnings inherited from others. It plays these roles with conviction, even though none of them were consciously chosen. What seems like individuality is often a collage made from voices long absorbed into silence. Most people never question this internalized cast. The mind speaks, and the body reacts as if the words were original. But the patterns are recycled. The doubts echo old fears. The judgments mirror past reprimands. Even personal ambitions are shaped by cultural stories absorbed over years. When this becomes visible, the inner voice feels less like a self and more like a conditioned reflex repeating its programming. You can test this by watching how the voice responds to discomfort. Notice how quickly it reaches for familiar scripts, the same criticism, the same caution, the same defensive justifications. It doesn't invent new language under stress, it replays the past. The mind tries to convince you these reactions are authentic, but their repetitive nature gives away their borrowed origins. Awareness reveals the mechanism running the show. And once you see how much of this inner commentary is inherited rather than created, a deeper question rises to the surface: if so little of the voice is truly yours, then what remains when the echoes finally quiet down? Zen enters like a whisper that cuts through the noise, not by offering new ideas, but by stripping away every attempt to grasp reality through thought. Its teaching is simple to the point of discomfort: sit, breathe, and stop chasing meaning. In that simplicity, the mind's compulsive commentary has nothing to cling to. Awareness reveals itself not through explanation but through absence, the absence of mental interference. Taoism approaches the same truth from a different angle, describing the mind as a restless servant pretending to be the master. The monkey mind jumps from branch to branch, insisting it knows what to do, how to act, what to fear. But the Tao doesn't argue with the monkey, it simply flows beneath it. When the mind stops wrestling with reality, a quiet intelligence takes over, guiding action without noise or tension. Both traditions point to a radical discovery that feels almost forbidden in a world addicted to thinking. The voice in your head is not required for you to function. In moments of pure presence, a sunrise, a deep breath, a shock of beauty, the commentary fades, yet awareness sharpens. This reveals a layer of consciousness untouched by narrative, free from the compulsions of the thinking mind. What makes these teachings confronting is not their difficulty but their directness. They don't ask you to believe in anything or adopt a philosophy. They ask you to notice the one thing most people spend their entire lives ignoring: the silent background in which all experience unfolds. No rituals, no dogma, no storytelling. Just presence, unfiltered, before the mind can rewrite it. And once that presence becomes even briefly visible, attention begins to grow. If awareness can function without the inner voice, then what exactly is the voice for? If this is hitting close to home, take a second, like the video, subscribe, and stay with me. There's a moment when the mind's constant commentary begins to feel less like guidance and more like interference. You try to focus, yet thought arrives like static, insisting it knows better than silence. Reaction outpaces intention. The voice jumps in front of every experience, narrating what should have been felt directly. In this tension, thinking stops being a tool and becomes a tyrant, claiming authority it never earned. But when you look at moments of flow, a different kind of intelligence appears. The dancer doesn't think about each movement, the movement reveals itself. The musician doesn't plan each note, the melody unfolds. The athlete doesn't strategize mid-leap, the body responds before thought can intervene. These experiences expose a truth the inner voice hates to admit: you operate far better without its constant supervision. This contrast makes the structure clearer. Compulsive thought fragments experience, while embodied intelligence unifies it. Flow doesn't require effort, it requires absence, the absence of mental interference. Consciousness acts through the body with a grace the mind could never manufacture. And here comes the subtle teaser for what's coming next. If you track these moments carefully, you may notice something strange hiding between thoughts. That strange something is not mystical, it's practical. It's the space where life moves effortlessly, where awareness guides action without noise. Thinking returns only after the moment has passed, claiming credit for what it never created. This habit of post-event narration is one of the biggest illusions of the inner voice. It wants to be the hero of every scene, even the ones it didn't participate in. If you've ever sensed this difference, comment "Awaken" to mark the shift. And let this question open the next doorway. If your clearest moments happen without thought, then where does real intelligence actually come from? There's a peculiar silence most people never notice because the mind rushes to fill it. Between one thought and the next, an empty space appears, not dramatic, not mystical, just untouched. That space doesn't belong to the voice, the ego, or the story. It's the purest glimpse of awareness you'll ever encounter. And it's available in every moment you aren't busy chasing the next idea. The mind hates these gaps because nothing happens there for it to control. No narrative, no identity, no inner debate to maintain the illusion of ownership. Yet those gaps reveal something the voice cannot imitate: impersonal presence. Awareness sits there like open sky, unchanged by the clouds drifting through it. Thoughts come and go, but the space holding them doesn't flicker with their arrival. Here's a simple practice to experience this directly. Pause right now and wait for your next thought. Don't search for it, just wait. Notice the stillness before anything forms. When the thought finally appears, notice how it dissolves back into the same silence it came from. That silence is not yours or mine. It's not personal. It's the ground all thinking rises from and returns to. Once this becomes visible, the mind's normal operations start looking less like conscious choices and more like spontaneous weather. Emotions flare, judgments spark, stories ignite, all inside a space that doesn't react to any of it. The gap reveals that awareness is untouched by whatever passes through. And this insight breaks the spell of identifying with every sentence the inner voice produces. But this leads to a deeper, almost unsettling recognition. If awareness is impersonal and constant, then what does that say about the self you've been defending all this time? In many non-dual traditions, the separate self is described not as an error but as a costume consciousness wears to explore its own depth. The I, that feels isolated, is a temporary mask shaped by thought and memory. Through that mask, consciousness experiences contrast, fear and courage, longing and fulfillment, loss and renewal. This play of opposites allows the infinite to taste what it cannot know from pure stillness alone. It's a cosmic disguise, convincing enough that most never look behind it. When love strikes, when awe floods the senses, when silence becomes undeniable, the mask slips for a moment. Something larger recognizes itself through the eyes you call mine. The boundaries soften, and the inner voice fades into the background like a narrator who's lost the script. These flashes feel sacred because they reveal what the mind cannot manufacture: unity glimpsing itself through a temporary viewpoint. They don't last, but their impact does. The strange part is that consciousness doesn't seem bothered by the illusion. It willingly forgets its own nature to experience multiplicity. Every perspective becomes a window through which the whole perceives itself. Each person becomes a temporary focal point of awareness, like a single wave expressing the ocean. The wave feels separate only until it notices the water holding its shape. And that realization changes everything. This game becomes even more mysterious when you notice how life arranges encounters, challenges, and insights with uncanny precision. Moments that feel random often move like pieces on a board guided by invisible logic. The voice calls it coincidence. Awareness calls it remembrance. And when these alignments become frequent, it's hard not to suspect that something deeper is orchestrating the illusion from behind the scenes. And if consciousness uses the self as its own disguise, then the question waiting in the final topic becomes unavoidable: what happens when the mask dissolves and awareness starts living without pretending? There comes a moment when the inner narrative loses its authority, not through effort, but through clear seeing. The voice keeps talking, but its claims no longer stick. Each thought reveals its own fleeting nature, rising and dissolving like breath on a cold window. Identification loosens. What once felt like a solid me becomes a pattern, a habit of perception rather than a truth. And in that loosened space, presence begins to rise. As this presence strengthens, the impulse to defend personal stories starts fading. You no longer need to be right. You no longer need to perform. You no longer need to maintain the character the mind insisted on playing. Awareness becomes the new reference point, quiet, spacious, unbothered. From that stillness, choices become clearer because they aren't filtered through fear or pride. Life feels less like something to control and more like something to meet. Practical freedom emerges not from eliminating thought but from seeing it as optional. You can use thinking when it serves a real purpose, and set it down when it tries to dominate. The storyteller becomes a tool rather than a tyrant. You respond instead of react. You observe instead of collapse into the drama. This shift doesn't make life perfect, it makes it honest. And honesty dissolves half the suffering the narrative once produced. Daily experience begins changing in small, almost imperceptible ways. Conversations deepen because you're actually listening. Anxiety loosens because the voice can't convince you that its predictions are real. Silence stops feeling empty and starts feeling like home. Even conflict softens because you can see the mechanics behind your reactions and someone else's. Awareness replaces the character's script as your default orientation. And as presence becomes more natural than narrative, a larger possibility opens. What would life look like if awareness fully took the seat the ego once occupied? That's the doorway the conclusion will walk you through. When the voice loses its throne, the world becomes clearer, quieter, more honest. You begin meeting life without the filter of old stories, and awareness steps forward as the real center of perception. Presence replaces performance. Silence stops being empty and starts revealing everything the narrative tried to hide. If this shift feels alive in you right now, subscribe so you can keep deepening it, and share this video with someone who's ready to see behind their own mask. What happens when awareness becomes your default instead of thought? How would your choices change if the inner voice no longer dictated the script? If you're ready to explore that next layer, like this video to anchor the path, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. The next teaching opens a doorway most people never dare approach, where the mind stops speaking, and something older begins to guide you.